Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good today. Thanks for asking. And I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning in. So today in the Voice of Yoga, we're going to be talking about the full moon that happened on January 21st, 2019 at 12:17 AM Eastern Standard Time in Leo. This lunation has no aspects to it, bringing with it the opportunity to cooperate or separate, sow to the flesh or sow to the spirit. Listen as we discuss methods to determine individual levels of consciousness by examining allegiance. In this show, we will talk about the differences between matter and spirit. What we desire influences our outcome. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and connect with the beauty of holiness. So, Swami, I just want to talk to the listeners a little bit about the total eclipse that just happened. And I guess it's a pretty special one. It's also a super blood moon, which is a total lunar eclipse, a super blood moon, and a wolf moon. Happens during the middle of the winter. And the total lunar eclipse can happen only when the sun, earth, and moon are perfectly lined up. Anything less than perfection creates a partial lunar eclipse or no eclipse at all. So let's talk about what we can learn about the eclipse that just happened.
Yeah, I think working with the concept that what surrounds us is within us. So when we have these big planetary events, it's kind of like a way of cross-examining what is going on in the outer world and also is mirroring what could be happening in consciousness for us. So the sun, the moon, and the earth all being in alignment on an external image kind of gives us a clue to an internal dynamic between spirit, mind, and matter. And working with that simple rule that we say, what surrounds us is within us, that the appearance of the material world gets its light from the sun. And when you start to reflect on this, the moon appears because it is reflecting the sun's light. And all life has its origin in spirit. And so we as individuals on this planet really are reflecting the light of spirit.
So, Swami, in our opening, we talked about the fact that there are no aspects with this full moon. So I think that's a little unusual. Can you maybe go over with us maybe some indications that what that might symbolize and what does the chart look like?
Yeah, this particular full moon and the chart that I'm looking at is for Hampton, New Hampshire at 12:17 a.m. So that happened very early this morning. But there are no aspects to the sun-moon opposition, which, like you said, is quite unusual. But what I think that might represent for us is the fact that this particular opposition, and the nature of the opposition typically is cooperate or separate, because the principles are 180 degrees apart from one another. And so they're in full view of each other. And without having any other aspects to it, it minimizes any distractions that could come from an influence from Jupiter or Neptune or Mars or Saturn, so that it kind of gives us the opportunity to see this full moon with very little disturbance, which would give it a very clear reflection. And then, of course, if you look at some of the aspects that are happening that are not influencing it, but are influencing us as we witness this, that we have Jupiter is in Sagittarius, which is in rulership, conjunct Venus. Mars is in Aries, which is in rulership. Neptune is in Pisces, which is rulership. Saturn in Capricorn, which is in rulership. So you've got all of these really strong planets. And I really think that it can help us elevate our consciousness to the altitude that it really needs to help us understand the true meaning of the solar influence on human consciousness. And the other thing that I find interesting is that the sun is 0 degrees Aquarius and the moon is in Leo. The sun is in its detriment. So here the reflection can actually help lend understanding to the principle of spirit to human consciousness.
So, Swami, we know that the goal of yoga is total consciousness. So how do we use this time to help us elevate this consciousness that you're talking about?
Yeah, total consciousness as opposed to partial consciousness. Spirit is the finished kingdom of heaven, completion. Spirit is whole. And what most of us don't understand is that the universe and humanity and anything that is visible and tangible is apart from that unified spiritual state. So it's a very different consciousness. And our five sense mind, the part of our reality that comes under the heading of our ability to form thoughts and opinions, the changing conditions of our personal mentality, becomes a barrier for us to understand this thing called total consciousness, soul sense, awareness of the presence of the divine. And the reason it doesn't report in our five sense mind is because it is whole. And our senses work on contrast. So we're really living out from the reflection and not the source. And that's a big part of what this concept of yoga, union with the divine, or I really think it should be looked at as a reunion for most of us, because we're in a false sense of reality that is apart from the truth of our being, from the truth of reality. Because in reality, everything is spirit. Spirit is all, and all is one, and all is good. But for the most part, we're not seeing it that way. And the main reason why we're not seeing it that way is because we're trying to live out from the reflection. We're not living out from the truth of our being.
So I'm going to ask you, just for some more clarification, you talk about the truth of our being. Well, what exactly is that? What does it look like when we have awareness of it?
Yeah, the truth of our being is that we are made in the image and likeness of the divine, so that we are spirit, we are eternal, we are perfect, whole, complete, and that's the truth of our being. But that aspect of our makeup is outside of our field of awareness, because we are thinking with information that is coming from a reality that is apart from spirit. And we're dealing with the law of karma. I would start teaching and talk about samadhi, total consciousness, but we would start from being awake, being asleep, being alive, and being dead, that there's no difference. And that's a really important thing to start to look at. And then we break that down, because we start with, well, let's say we don't know what it's like to be dead, but we know what it's like to be awake, and we know what it's like to be asleep. We examine what it's like to be asleep. You're sound asleep, you're having a dream, and in your dream you're experiencing this dream as if it's something that's happening to us. And in the dream we see ourselves as separate entities, we see the people in this dream as separate entities, and all the events, circumstances, and situations as things that are happening to us. And then, of course, you come to the waking state, and we find that that is the same as the dream state, that we go through life and we see ourselves as separate entities. We see the people that are around us as separate entities. And what's the reality of our situation is that we're just experiencing this thought form. And from this very narrow perspective, we see ourselves as victims, that everything is happening to us. But with the practice and the processes that we are learning with the spiritual science of Kriya Yoga, that matter and mind have to come together with new information. Because if we continue to draw from duality, if we continue to draw from fear and limitation, then we perpetuate this law of karma, and we perpetuate this hypnotic trance that we're in. And in order for us to move beyond that, we have to recognize the presence of spirit. We have to recognize the presence of the perfection of being, which is here, it's now, but it is invisible and it's intangible, and it doesn't report in our five sense mind. But if we can hold our attention on it, then we can activate it.
Swami, I'm sure a lot of people, as well as myself, were wondering, well, what's the first thing that we should do to make ourselves aware?
Well, the thing I would refer to is what it says in the Bible. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. We really need to understand what spirit is, where it is, and how do I identify with it. And what we're trying to connect to is something that's invisible and intangible, but some of the characteristics of it that we know is that it is absolute goodness, it is absolute harmony, absolute peace, happiness, it is eternal, it is unchanging. And so these are the things that we want to try and look for to appear in our reality. And the more that we can start to demonstrate these divine qualities in our external experiences, then the closer we are to it. But in the framework of doing this, you have to look for all of the different ways that this can go wrong, because in between matter and spirit is this thing called mind. And it can become a huge barrier, because what is invisible but tangible is kind of like the imitation of truth. And in a lot of respects, you can use mind to turn what we call finite bad into finite good. But it's not the same as eternal, absolute goodness. That absolute goodness comes from the void or the nothing. It comes from what is invisible and intangible. So I think that's the first order of business, and that is the thing that I'm really looking forward to, trying to see if this lunation may have brought what is invisible and intangible into visibility for human acknowledgement.
All right, great. Well, I think this is a good place to pause to hear a word from our sponsors. So listeners, we will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and the 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, in our opening, we have listed that we were going to discuss methods to determine individual levels of consciousness by examining allegiance. So, wondering if you could maybe drill that down for us and maybe give us a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, usually what we're loyal to are things that we like or things that we are in love with and admire. And so whatever it is that we're attracted to really will strengthen our allegiance. So if we are attracted to things visible and tangible, to matter, then we will resonate to a lower vibration. We will be of more of an animal nature. We'll be more emotional, reactive, instinctual. We'll be mostly driven by moving towards what we want, moving away from what we don't want. If we are attracted to waves, if we are attracted to thoughts and thinking and analyzing, then we will be more of a human nature, and we will be more logical, reasonable, rational. But if we are attracted to the void or the nothing, spirit, then we will be of a divine nature, and we will be attracted to the absolute. We will be attracted to peace, love, happiness, goodness, things that are of divine quality. Whatever it is that we desire is really what it is that we will be loyal to.
You had mentioned earlier, you were talking about divine qualities, and I think it's just more than just looking at the person, recognizing that they're also God's reflection. It has to go deeper than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think if you resonate to a particular frequency, if you are of an animal nature yourself, you have a tendency to bring out the animal in those that you perceive, because that is what you perceive in them. And that's one of the things that we're learning is why observation has effect on reality. That is the observer that sets the measurement for the collapse of the wave function, which means that it determines where this particle is going to appear. And so if you're living out from a lower vibration, then of course you're going to bring this out in your environment, and it will start to respond to you. Whereas if you are of a higher vibration, you will actually elevate people that may not normally see that in themselves, because spirit is the only principle in this universe. Spirit is the only thing that has power. And so by us seeing it, we activate it. Like attracts like. So when spirit is recognized, then it responds with the qualities of its nature.
So I think what you're saying is that we have to see the goodness in everything, and that's part of recognizing divine qualities. So in other words, if I look out the window and I witness something that might be judged as bad, maybe I witness a fender bender, right? But in God's world, there is no such thing as anything that's bad. So just by my witnessing that and acknowledging that pulls me out of being the reflection of divinity.
Right. And the reverse is true. By you rebuking the testimony of your senses and not accepting that that is possible, because an accident is not possible in God's world. God does not create an accident, and God does not know what it does not create. But by us looking beyond the testimony of our senses and holding to the truth of our being, that God is all, and God is good, and God is everywhere and in everything, by us holding true to that, it will have an effect on that external situation or circumstance or experience.
So we can go so far as to say that God does not create sickness and disease. He does not create punishments for us. It's not God's fault if we lose our jobs or anything like that. And I think that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow, because they automatically would say, well, this is God's will. This is God's will that I don't have a job. This is God's will that I am not feeling well or have a headache or whatever that might be.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we are stuck collectively in the law of karma. Because of these types of beliefs, we accept things and we don't have the leadership in learning how to change them. And what surprises me is anytime on the planet people have appeared who offered this type of solution to the collective, like Jesus and Mary Baker Eddy and people like Joel Goldsmith, they usually have a certain influence directly during their lifetime because of the magnificent work that they're doing. But then it seems to drop off and it loses its momentum because we get bogged down back into this type of thinking, these human concepts, these human beliefs. And that's what creates and perpetuates this cycle of death and rebirth, this law of karma. And in order to get out of it, we really have to look past the testimony of our senses. We have to develop faith. And faith is belief in truth. And the truth of our being is that we are eternal spiritual beings. But the essence, the principle of our life is spirit.
So the pull to the universal mind or mortal mind is so strong that those of us who are trying to seek these levels of consciousness, seems like we have to work even harder to maintain that certain level of awareness.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is because we've really lost the science behind it. Mary Baker Eddy, she discovered that what Jesus was doing was a science, that he was employing principles that are at work. They're here, they're now. But what we get lost in is being able to figure out what she means by certain terms. Simple things like to think with God as God shows us the perfection of the body. Now, if you have absolutely no idea what she's talking about, then you think thinking is what we do. And we think that God thinks like us. But it doesn't work like that. We think with black letters on white paper. God thinks with white letters on white paper. Mm-hmm. So we're not measuring apples to apples. And that's what a lunation like this hopefully starts to bring into our field of awareness, so that we can start to understand Scripture. We can understand what Jesus was telling us. And in the framework of starting to figure that out, we could start to rise above the law of karma, this cycle of death and rebirth, or the way that the Buddha talked about it is suffering. Or the Yoga Sutras call it ignorance. that in order for us to get out of it, we have to know the truth of our being. We have to know that God is all, that God is good, and God is everywhere and in everything. But it's not going to report in our five sense mind. So we have to let go of our senses. And that brings us to what we call pratyahara, sense withdrawal. That's when you really start to move beyond thinking rationally or even with the higher mind or the collective consciousness or your subconscious, and you start to link with divine mind.
Well, I like what you had said earlier when you had talked about the moon reflects the light of the sun and the individual is the reflection of the divine. I thought that was a really good symbolism.
Right. And to really understand that, because by reflection, what is meant is the state of mind considering its own content. So when you think about that, we are God's idea, that we are to God what Hamlet is to Shakespeare. God is our life. I love what it says in the Bible that in my Father's house there are many mansions. And metaphorically, house in the Bible usually makes reference to consciousness. So in God's consciousness, there are many mansions. There are many ideas. So each and every one of us are really just a thought in divine mind.
So it seems to me what we really have to do is you really have to look at our world with different eyes and hear with a different sense, not with our hearing with our ears, but really kind of hearing as if we were listening with God's ears and seeing with God's eyes and speaking with God's words. And that can be, I think, challenging for us because we are so pulled into this universal mind, this mortal mind.
Right. And that's the whole thing of the difference between sowing to the flesh and sowing to the spirit. Because if we sow to the flesh, then matter is real to us. We are under the law of karma. But if we sow to the spirit, then we transcend karma and we are under the divine law, which is God's perfect law of creation. But in the framework of trying to do this, we find that spirit isn't so easy to sow to because of this whole thing of called mind, world mind, individual mortal mind.
And I think it's so easy for us to get pulled into that because what you say, our senses show us what's going on around us.
Right. And we are like carbon steel, and the outside world is like a magnet. And so a big part of what we do in Kriya Yoga is we have to refine ourselves. We have to change that carbon steel to a non-magnetic stainless steel so that the pull of the world no longer has any influence on us. And then from there, then we can experience this thing called liberation or freedom. And it's freedom from the law of karma.
Well, this is a great place to end our show for this morning. So listeners, I invite you to visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com. And once you're there, you can access the Blog Talk Radio shows on that home page about 3/4 of the way down. You'll see them listed under Swami Says Recent Post. Don't forget, we also do a Facebook Live episodes every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And Swami, if you could direct our people how to access your webinars that you do on Wednesday mornings at noon.
If you go to the website, click on online classes, that will take you to a page. If you scroll down to where it says Pray on Prana, those are the free webinars. And it's just an open discussion group, really. And sometimes it's just me and another person, but that's fine. You can register for the webinar right there.
Great. And do you have any other final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to establish allegiance with the perfection of their own being, their spiritual sense of selfhood. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.